Want insight, encouragement, and the truth about writing, speaking, and creating? Welcome to For Writers and Speakers, the Called Creatives podcast, hosted by myself, Alli Worthington.
And I'm Lisa Whittle, and today we welcome the incredible Nicole Unice, pastor, writer, speaker. We had an incredible conversation that you're not going to want to miss. So listen in. Oh, we're so excited today to welcome our friend Nicole Unice to the show. She is a consultant, a pastor, a writer, a podcaster. And what else do you do, Nicole? Probably a myriad of other things. I think I've called you a counselor at some point, a therapist. You perhaps are.
Women can have many lives within a life. I started my career as a therapist. Sometimes that gives a little bit of the connection between why do I talk so much about like emotional and spiritual health. So first career was as a therapist, then a pastor. Actually now like work in a role in a startup. Lots of different lives within this life, but certainly love like the communicating side of things, the writing and the speaking and all that. Just like you guys.
See, I knew that therapists came in there somewhere, and I wasn't totally in left field. We were actually laughing before we came on here about technology because we were having such a difficult time with our technology. But that kind of leads me to a question. One of the things that I think as writers and speakers and people who do this for a living have to deal with all the time is the things that come with it.
Yeah.
What is something that came with your career as a Bible teacher, a writer, a public figure, social media person? Maybe that's it. What's something that came with it that you're like, I didn't expect that. And also I wasn't really ready for that. And I'll say technology for me.
Yeah. I think there's the thing that I often talk about. I don't know that I just didn't think about it. I don't know that I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I certainly just didn't think about the fact that for every minute on a stage or every book that gets written, there's thousands of hours of business behind the scenes. Like there's just a lot of business to be done, from negotiating contracts to booking travel to handling logistics to making the connection to showing up well for the people that you're serving. There's just a lot of business and a lot of details, and I don't like details at all. And I think I've used that as a crutch in the past to just not be as responsible to the work as I've needed to be, and maybe as responsible to the commitment. Because it's one thing to say, oh, I'm just going to fly, I'm going to fly to preach this weekend. It's another to really think about what that means in the context of the whole business, the whole life that you're living. And there's a lot more to it than just that hour that you spend.
Mm.
That's such a great point. We are always teaching people at Called Creatives the little things, the boring things, the things that aren't as exciting, right? Like, yes, we need to learn email, and yes, we need to put a website together, and yes, we need to do these things. And so many women go, well, that's not my gifting.
Right.
My gifting is to do X, Y, and Z. And we're like, we get it. Not our gifting either, naturally. Everyone in the beginning really needs to learn like the little things, the admin, or the things that don't make them come alive, because the boring work will support all the great work. And eventually you get to the point where you don't have to do the boring work anymore. But it's one of those things. What's something else about what you're doing now with before you started would have shocked you to learn?
Something else I'm doing now that before I got going, I would have been surprised to know. My story into being an author and a speaker is, like many people, probably not linear. A lot of it was related to limitations I was experiencing as a female in ministry leadership, not having opportunity to do what I do in the local space. Now that's changed actually. But I very early on started writing down what, if in my wildest dreams, I would be able to see happen in my life. And one of those things was preaching on a Sunday morning, which now I do all the time in many spaces, which is crazy to me when I think about that. The other was to be able to do video series, love the idea of communicating in a variety of ways. I don't consider myself a writer first. So writing was like a direction, but I actually really love communicating the fullness of the experience, which back before I was a therapist, I was a fitness instructor. And so when I was in full-time fitness, you're creating an experience when you lead a group. It's the music, it's the pace, it's the direction of the experience. All of that contributes to someone feeling really strong, feeling really good, and you want their appropriate amount of challenge, et cetera. And so had a dream that I would be able to take all of that kind of music and setting and experience together into doing video. And that seems like a ridiculous thing to think I could do when I started in 2010. And I just did my 4th series with Right Now Media this summer. Those are the good things. So on the good side, there was like the part of it where I would always say to anyone listening, definitely dream big and write down all the things. You don't have to show anybody your list. It can just be for you, but put buckets down and be like, if I could accomplish this, if I could do this in my family, in my spiritual life, in my vocation, make that list. I mean, I think I had probably 200 things on that list. I think there's that side of things where it's so exciting to celebrate that. On the side of things that are like more challenging, I think, yes, I do think that when you get whatever we want to consider successful, there might be boring things that you don't have to do anymore. But over and over again, I'm reminded they are ultimately my responsibility. Everything is ultimately my responsibility. The professionalism with which a contract is written, the way that I show up, the contact name that I know, all the pieces, the way that we end an engagement, the way we begin an engagement, I can delegate that all day long, but I have to retain like the ultimate responsibility to make sure that I'm doing that in a way that honors the people that we're engaging with and that honors the people who are working for me. And that's just a grown up like reality of, running a business, which is what this is, which is what I always tell people. It's wonderful if you want to do writing as a hobby, as an art, as whatever. If you want to do it as a business, it's totally different. Like it's a different thing to want to be published as a business. And that does not negate either choice, but we should recognize that they are two different choices. I think getting around that and resonating with that is helpful, early on in the trajectory of whatever you're doing, wherever you're going.
Such an important point. And we agree wholeheartedly over here. I know you're speaking to Alli's business heart over there, especially. As I hear you talking, one of the things that comes to my mind is the word confidence. And I think that what a lot of writers feel, right, in their beginning stages is just this sort of insecurity. It's a lack of confidence, right? I don't know that I could be a business person. I don't know that I can write this book. I want to, but I don't know that I can. I don't know that I can get on stage. And so some people call it imposter syndrome. I think at the core, it's just this insecurity. It's this lack of confidence. And then that's exacerbated by looking around at people that have been doing it for 20 years and have developed this sort of rhythm and some confidence in it. And so I think my question to you, Nicole, would be, what do you say to someone who feels insecure at the beginning stages and feeling like, I don't know that I can do it? Yeah. What word would you give them?
So good, Lisa. I think, I don't know how often you guys feel insecure, still. And because I do all the time, I'm always nervous. I'm always nervous. I mean, my family is so surprised when I tell them that. They're like, you're nervous about your sermon? I'm like, I'm always nervous. I'm always going to be a little like, you're not going to get in front of 1,500 people and not feel something about the quietness of that moment where you're like, okay, here we go. I think that what's really important and the way that I think insecurity can actually serve us is by asking the question, well, what's the message that I have for this person? Almost separating the message from me personally. Like I'm not selling myself. I'm not like selling something I have. It's something that God's given me to say or to bring or to move someone to. And if you can take the message outside of yourself, I was actually just coaching a friend about this yesterday who's fundraising for missions work. And I'm like, well, it's not about people giving to you. It's about you inspiring them with the message of what you're giving your life to and putting that in front and saying, that's more important than my insecurity. Sometimes we have to do that. And I know that we get a seed might be planted in your heart by God and you're like, I think I want to be a writer, or I know I have a book inside of me. That's a great place to start. But the next question has to be, I know I have a book inside of me, and this is why it's for this person. It's like a book inside of you for you is a journal. A book inside of you for others is something more, right? That requires, I think, the work of getting over the insecurity. And as long as we're focused on it being about us, we're going to feel really insecure. But if I can focus on like, what is this message and what have I been through, or what have I learned, or how has God shaped my life in a way that has given me a message that I really think can help this person, whoever that person is or people, then it becomes less about, well, how urgent is the message is much more important than how insecure do I feel. Not that your insecurity will go away, but it shifts your focus outside of yourself, which I think can be really helpful.
So good.
Yeah, that's a great word. For me, my confidence has been built through the years by looking at my history of getting back up when something didn't work, right? So we're all afraid of failure. I think for women who want to write and speak, there is an extra intensity of that failure because women go, what if I invest in my dream? What if I invest in my calling with time, energy, money, and it doesn't work out? You know, like, what are people going to think?
Yeah.
And it is this intense fear. But for all of us, I mean, if we put together all of our failures, they would be a mile long. And I'm always saying, you know, failure isn't bad. Failure is just a stepping stone to what will actually work. And I love hearing about the behind the scenes. Okay, here's my failure. So tell me yours. What's a big failure that you recovered from or learned something from?
Well, I'll tell you guys about my first book because that's what I mean. There's so many. I'm like, do you want something from today? Do you want something from last week? Do you want something? So since we're here on talking about writing, I'll talk about that first book because I know there's probably a lot of folks who are thinking about what that'd be like. It was so much harder than I thought. It took so much longer. There was so much rejection, getting used to knowing how to, and I always encourage small wins. If you want to write a book, like what's a small win? How do you make sure you know what your voice is? And getting an article on a website or, you know, having someone let you guest post on their blog. Like those are starting points, right? I was working on those small wins and I had gotten to that next hurdle, finally had that really, okay, now I have an agent. And then we were in the process of writing this proposal, which, by the way, in a nonfiction book, I always call that a business plan. I'm writing a business plan. This person wants to know, how am I going to sell this thing? There's nothing like mystical about it. It truly is, how are you author, going to sell your book? Not how are we going to sell your book? It's a partnership, right? I was in that process and I kid you not, guys, I'm sure you guys have talked about the writing process, but you know, there's several committees and you go up to in traditional publishing. I got to the last committee with like every single name, we won't name them, but let's just name every name. And I'm there. I'm at the last, so which means I rewrote that proposal 5 to 6 times for every single publishing house. Every one of them wanted something different. Everybody wanted a slightly different angle, contradicting information coming from different publishers, writing. I mean, I felt like a failure literally the whole time. Every time that I got to the end, you've put in all of this work and you've tried to do everything. And y'all, I was a good student. So I'm like, if someone's going to give me feedback, I'm going to meet their feedback so much that at one point I got so far with one publisher and it was rewrite. This is just the business plan, just the 50-page rewrite these 40 pages of, you know, the start of this book. And I finally I back and forth. And then I got one email and it was like, I felt like they were literally asking me to do the one thing that I was standing up against. It was like something, it doesn't matter what it was, but it was the tone was taking me in the direction that was exactly the reason I started writing in the first place, was that I felt like I had an untraditional woman's voice. I felt like they were saying, be a more traditional woman's voice, a little more traditional, a little more. And I finally had this moment where I was like, oh, I'm supposed to call it quits with this publisher. Like, I need to stop trying to win this publisher's approval. They're a great publisher. It's no problem. But there was so much failing in that for me, like every little mini failure. Every time I rewrote something that I felt like I already bled all over the page and they didn't like it and they didn't like my tone and they didn't want that. And then I finally got to one publishing committee and my editor, the editor came back. This is my favorite story. The editor came back. It was very short. That's never a good sign. Like, she's like, I'm going into the committee. Like, I'll call you back. You know, very short. She calls me back. She's like, they don't like you and they don't think you're funny.
Oh.
So that was it. Like, that killed me. That crushed me. I literally laid down on my floor and cried. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. I'm just not going to do it. This is too hard. I've gotten to the end with all these guys. Every single one of them is turning me down. Someone thinks I'm something, but it's not true. I'm not anything. It's not going to work. I'm not funny. This isn't good. Nobody wants it. I laid on my floor and cried. I had a very strong agent who said to me, why don't you think about this for a few days? Because it's like, maybe you should quit. Which really got me on my, and she was like, why don't you pray about it for a few days and decide if your message is worth it and call me back? Which is exactly what I needed to hear, because I had gotten all of my feels and all of my insecurity and I had so many disappointments and so many failures and nothing was working. And I felt like I was like, God, have you forsaken me. You know, I'm just so dramatic. And because it was a lot of work, it was hundreds of hours of work. It was thousands of dollars of investment in websites and writing conferences and, you know, and I was like, it's not going to work out. It was the most important thing that I could have ever heard was, do you want to do this? Why don't you think about it for a few days?
Yes.
And it kicked my butt. And I like got off of the floor after a couple days and was like, no, you're right. I do want to do this. And like the next thing happened. The book got picked up like a few weeks later. It was just so important for me to have that moment and recognize this is not about me. This is not a problem. I'm not going to be an A+ student to every single person. This is going to be a lot of work. This is a business. You don't just become a writer without putting thousands of hours and dollars into the work, regardless of how good of a natural writer you are. There is a lot to it. There is nothing better that could have happened to me than that. That needed to happen to me. It changed the trajectory of my career because of the way that I think about the work is so different. My skin is so much thicker because of that experience with all of those different publishing houses and all those different editors.
I think that's so good. First of all, so many things. Sometimes you just need someone to call your bluff when you're pouting. The other thing is, I think if you can be talked out of this career, then this career is not for you because it is something that you should not be able to be talked out of. There's a lot of rejection along the way. You got to have tough skin, and it's a beautiful career, but it is not for the faint of heart. So I love that you shared that. Another thing that I think a lot of creatives struggle with is what I call creative chaos. And it's this, I have all these ideas. I have all of this stuff that I want to do. And this is very close to my own heart because I can tell you I have a million ideas in a day. There's so many things that I want to do, would love to do, all of those kinds of things, but I can't get them all done. I would just run out of time. So for the person that feels this creative chaos, I have all these ideas and I don't know which one to pick. Do you have any great tips on how you pick a project?
Yeah. I had a mentor actually, whether it was something I read or it wasn't like a person that was in my life, but like I caught something early on in especially my writing career. Same thing goes for speaking. And it was always write the first 5 pages because you will run out of, or 15. Write the first 15 pages of any idea, like 15 pages, because you'll run out of steam if it's not what you're supposed to do. And I think so many of us actually take comfort in the idea of creative chaos. Well, it's just because I have so many ideas. Like I just, and it's comfortable because we don't have to fail because we never started. And we don't have to like do the sacrificial work, which is the hard part, which is the tyranny of the blank page. You're like looking at the page. How am I going to take this idea that I'm thinking about and put it down on paper or in a voice memo or whatever? And I have so many book ideas that they just like fizzled out after 15 pages. It's just like, I thought it was great. And then I went to go try to figure out how to do it. And I was like, oh, I'm not really feeling this. And then a little portion of it would become like an ingredient for that next recipe. I do think the practice of saying, even if you leave your home, go to a coffee shop, give yourself a 90-minute block of time, be like, I'm going to spend Saturday morning from 8 to 9:30, and I'm going to write down this idea. And I'm going to write through this whole idea, even if the idea is not a writing idea, it's like something else, but still write it. You'll feel the energy building in it or fizzling in it by practicing that. And you might do that 10 or 15 times, 10, 15 different ideas. And you're going to find that one of them either they come together and they merge into one thing, or you do feel a more like stronger sense of a direction. And remember that communicating, we're here to communicate. Communicating comes in a lot of forms. It might be like, oh, well, maybe this thing that I thought would be really cool, maybe it should be a podcast where I interview people about this topic, or this thing that I thought would be a book. Maybe it's actually a Bible study that I could self-publish, or, like, remember, there's a lot of ways to communicate, and writing is just one of them. And writing isn't always the right or the best method for the idea that you have, but the way you're going to get there is by writing it out and seeing if it fizzles or builds over time.
That's great.
That's one of the
I don't know what you guys,
tips.
what do you guys do?
I mean, that's one of the best tips I've heard in a long time. That's so good. For me, my rule of thumb is I can only do one new thing in a year. I'm always looking for ways to figure out what's the right new thing. And I like that. Like, let me go spend some time with it. Let me see if I really have a passion for it, or it's just something that lit me up in one day. I love that.
Or it becomes like one little piece of like a bigger idea. I've had it go both directions where my idea was too big and then one little piece emerged from it. Or I had the one idea and then a bigger idea came from it. But you have to do the hard, like painful. That's why I'm always like, go to a coffee shop, like whatever makes you feel happy. If that's your morning for a scone or whatever, like create a comfortable environment to make you feel as comfortable as you can and give yourself a finite amount of time, not the whole day, not a whole week. Just give yourself a block of time, sit with the idea and see what comes out of it. Then you'll know if I want to just leave this in my notes app for like later or if something really substantive comes out of it.
That's so good. That's so practical. Speaking of practical, what are some tips that you would give women who are interested in stepping into this? Or another way of asking is, what do you wish you knew? Like, what do you wish people had told you? Tips
for the writing or the
no?
speaking journey?
Either, wherever you want to go with it. Let's see.
One of the things that was always helpful that I learned really early on was write and speak for one person. Find your person that is either, for me, it's always been an actual person. There'll be someone in my life that'll be in my life and I'll think, I'm just going to pretend like I'm writing this whole book for her. The whole book is a letter, like, dear you, like, and then I'm writing to that person. Same thing when I speak. When I speak, I think about, I have had the benefit of the wonderful thing about being a therapist was the 4,000 hours of client time of just literally listening to people. But guys, women love to talk. Like you can find a friend who really would want to share about their life. Like people want to be listened to. And if you learn to listen really well, I think one of the things you learn when you listen a lot is, oh, I'm going to be the cynic in the room when I'm speaking, not a cynic about me, a cynic about what I'm saying. And I'm going to answer the objections that that person has in the way that I teach. And it's just one person. I'm just thinking about what I want to say to it. That for some reason that unblocks my mind for all that insecurity and failure or stage fright or whatever you want to call it. I just say, what's that one thing? What's the thing I would say just to that one person? And that has been helpful. I return to that a lot and I'll think about that person's name. I'm on page 98 and I'm like, you know, is Olivia still hanging with me? Is this still worth reading? I'm thinking about that one person reading, and it also gets me out of my own way in a lot of ways.
That's so good. Well, you know, I've got to ask you about your latest project, your book, Not What I Signed Up For, which I had the honor of writing the foreword for this book.
Which is always right there. I always like that your name is hyperlinked on Amazon. Like that's one of my favorite things about forewords is like the person's name is with your name. Like when you're
what an honor. It brought me great joy because you are just a joy in my life. And I think you're such a wise woman. And this is such a good book. And so just tell us quickly, what did you love about this particular project, this book that you wrote, Not What I Signed Up For?
Yeah, I mean, books really are like babies. I do think that each of them, they're birthed from us and they're all your favorites for all kinds of reasons. But anytime we bring life into something, it morphs and it changes like as you go. You know, you're in a relationship with this book as God is bringing it forth. And this one was a new challenge for me. This is the first time that I did a deep dive into one story in the Bible, but also I was trying to weave 3 different storylines together. So obviously there needs to be my own storyline and my own voice in there. Then we have a very detailed and amazing story from the Bible going in there. And then that third piece of the braid was, and why, dear reader, does this apply to you? And what, dear reader, does this mean for you? And so it was a new challenge for me because the complexity of trying to weave together those in a way that's organized, that helps somebody stick with you, like that they can walk through that. And as is per usual, this happens every book I write. It's so funny that my editor might as well just record this message and send it to me. What happens, and I do this a lot, is I'll write the whole book. And then the editor calls me and says, we need a few more personal stories because I don't want to be vulnerable. Like I actually don't. I don't want to be courageous. I don't want to be exposed. I don't want to tell you guys all of my business, but then they're right. Like it just always is. There's this spot. So I've come to be okay with that. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to write this as vulnerably as I can round 1, knowing in the back of my mind, it's going to have to be more vulnerable even round 2. That was a new journey with this book. Really just like appreciating the scripture, just the way that God tells a story and, entering into a Bible story that's very long, so 13 chapters in Genesis. Only Paul is really talked about. It's like Paul, Jesus, and Joseph. Nobody thinks about that. Like, so long. And getting into, with Faith, this idea, we're all storytellers, we're all writers here. The detail, the word choice, the pieces of the story, the color that's given to the story, and how many clues God has hidden within that story about what it means to really live a life where you're blessed even in suffering, and you're growing and trusting God even when you can't see what's going on or where God is even in the story. And there's so many of those elements and those clues in that story that got to be part of the discovery process of writing this book. I just loved it. It just was so delightful.
It's brilliant.
Well, I'm excited to read it. So
Yay.
This is really exciting. I love that concept. I love that you two are partnered on this book. And
I think I have a note to you, Alli, right here that I never. Oh, speaking of business,
yeah.
Who never sent you this note with the book? Nicole. So it'll come. It's coming.
It's the little things.
Because it really is the little things. And you just have to have a lot of we have to have a lot of grace for ourselves. But truly, there's so many little pieces. But you guys have been mentors to me and people that I look up to. Alli, your business, your coaching, the way that you move through new ideas and just take them and go with it. I just love that part of your personality. That's like, it's a new idea. Of course it's going to work. It's going to be amazing. Cause I'm like, not that, that's not my personality. So I get vicarious confidence from you, which I love. And Lisa, of course, like we just have such a heart connection without a lot of time together. And I love, love, love both of y'all's writing and work in the world. And you're making a difference for so many. And I hope for everyone listening, they feel that sense of being mentored and encouraged by you guys like I have been.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we're going to have you on every episode.
Hey, listen, I will be your number one hype man. I'm happy to do that.
Well, speaking for Lisa as well, I feel like I can. We love you and we thank you for coming on the show, and we're cheering you on.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us today on the Called Creatives podcast. Hey, if you want to finally write that book, be sure to download the free book proposal that we've created for you at calledcreatives.com/book-proposal. Happy writing.